Mary Greiner.
My guest today at the Iowa Falls Historical Society is Mary Greiner. Mary, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us just briefly a little bit about yourself?
I'm Mary Greiner, and I live right here in town and next to Foster Park, and like the town very much. We moved from the farm from Alden, and so my husband died 15 years ago, and of course he was in the Air Force, and he was in the Troop Carrier Command. He flew the C-47s, and so he saw quite a bit of action. And so...
Mary, why don't you tell us a little bit about the plane crash your husband had in World War II?
Okay. Yes. My husband Leonard was taking part in the D-Day time, and he was hauling troops onto the front lines, and of course they were dropping these poor guys, not knowing that the enemy was waiting for them, and so he saw many bodies hanging in trees, and also he said the river that they were flying over was red with the blood from some of the troops that had been shot down. And he said, and that day, he's lucky that he even made it back to the camp, because he saw this one. He looked down and he saw this gunner had his guns aimed right at their plane, and it shot the rudder off from underneath his foot. And if they had held fire, it would have riddled their whole plane, and they probably would have never made it back themselves. And then later, the other experience that he had, they were hauling gas into General Patton. General Patton was going through France at a very high speed, and needing gas supplies. And so they were hauling this gas, and they had unloaded their cargo and were headed back to camp when both engines gave out. And so Leonard was piloting the plane at this time, and he thought the best thing to do would be to turn off the gas that was to the plane, so to prevent it exploding what they did have left. And they needed to do a crash landing, of course, and they saw a place to land, but before they landed, they hit a hedgerow, and so my husband, his seat broke loose, and he went through the windshield of the plane, and it broke his jaw in 3 places. But the co-pilot was not hurt, and he never did know what happened to him for years. But anyway, Leonard, my husband, spent the next 11 months in the hospital, partly in France, and then the rest of the time they sent him back to the States. I think he got to the Schick Hospital in Clinton, Iowa. I think that's where he spent the rest of his time there, and he had to. He had to learn to eat because he had his jaw broken in 3 different places. So he had to walk around with a cup holding saliva. He had no control of that, and he had to eat through a straw for months. And then they put a splint on his jaw to hold this because he broke teeth in his jaw. and it was called the Roger Anderson splint that they put on him, which was something new. In fact, the doctors really here in the States were hoping they could get a copy or maybe change it so they could get a copy of this splint that enabled him to sort of live normal for a while. But anyway, as I said, he spent 11 months in the hospital, and then of course he was discharged, and then he didn't really care about flying again. He had a friend that said, maybe you'd like to take over and fly, because he at the time, this other fellow, was flying for a company in Chicago, and he thought maybe Leonard would like to get behind the wheel again and, do some flying. But Leonard never cared about doing that again. And so, and we were not married at that time, but he came back after 11 months, he came back to the farm and farm near Hudson, Iowa, and he and his brother farmed together. And then we were married shortly after that. And so we had spent a wonderful life together.
Mary, could you briefly tell us too about Leonard meeting his crewmate after a long number of years?
He would always say his name was Ralph Curtis, and he never heard anything. He often wondered what ever happened to him. He was probably shook up, but not. He didn't go through the windshield, so he wasn't hurt. But anyway, we were gone. We had spent the winter in Arizona, and we came back. There was a message on our phone, and it was this fellow. He said, "This is Ralph Curtis," and he said, "I'm looking for a man named Leonard Greiner," and he said, "I have found there's so many Leonard Greiners in the U.S." He said, "But I'm hoping that maybe I'll get the right one." And he said, "If you are the Leonard Greiner that flew," and he mentioned different things that they had done together, he said, "Give me a ring." So my husband called this number, and from that it was the person that he flew with. And so it was quite a reunion. And he and his wife, they lived in the Chicago area. And anyway, he and his wife, Rita, came to see us out to the farm. No, we were in town at the time. It came, and then we went and visited them, and we became bosom friends, let me tell you. Both of them have passed away, and as my husband has too. But we had many happy times together, and we got to know their family, and they got to know our family, and so it was a kind of a reunion. I have a clipping of the Times-Citizen where they told about this story, about them getting together, but it was quite a deal for them to see each other again. You should have seen them when they met for the first time. It was quite a reunion, and they hadn't seen each other since the day that they had the plane crash over in France.
And Mary, could you repeat for the people who are watching your husband's name?
What was that?
Could you repeat for the people who are watching your husband's name?
Yes, my husband's name is Leonard Greiner, and he came from the Waterloo area, Hudson, Iowa, and he's the youngest of 11 children, and he went back to farming then again after we were married, and we were in the Alden area for several years, and then he retired, and we moved to Iowa Falls, and that's where we lived, and we did spend winters in Arizona, and he died 15 years ago now.
And could you tell the people who are watching your age?
Sure, I've started over again. I'm only 4, but so I'm really 104.
104.
104, and I can't do the things I used to do, and I'm not happy about that, but I guess I'm very grateful to be doing the things I do, so.
Well, we're very grateful for you and your husband and the wonderful family you raised, and for speaking to us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mary.
That you would be even interested, you know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.